Imagine being handed the keys to one of the longest running face shows on earth, only to realize that no matter what creative choice you make, no matter who you cast in the role of the Doctor, someone out there will call it the end of Doctor Who. That's exactly what's happened not once, but twice in the modern era. When Jodie Whittaker was revealed as the first female Doctor, the internet erupted into chaos. Headlines screamed, comment sections flooded, and a vocal pocket of fans insisted that this was the death of the franchise. Years later, history repeated itself. Ncuti Gatwa, the first black male Doctor, was announced, and again the backlash hit like a tidal wave. And here's where things get fascinating. A producer has now stepped forward not just to defend these casting decisions, but to peel back the curtain on what the show really stands for. And his words, they strike at the very heart of what Doctor Who has always been about. But the strange truth is, this fight isn't about casting. It never really was. It's about something deeper. A clash between nostalgia and evolution. Between what the show was and what it's desperately trying to become. Think about it. Since the very first episode in 1963, the Doctor has been about change. New faces, new personalities, regeneration after regeneration. But for some reason, when the Doctor finally broke certain boundaries, fans acted like the sky was falling. Why is that? Why does a franchise built on transformation suddenly feel threatened when it actually transforms? Let's go back to Jodie Whittaker. Her casting was met with headlines that practically framed it as a political decision, an attempt to tick boxes, to play culture wars. But ask yourself, if a character who can literally shapeshift across centuries and species can't be a woman, what does that say about us? And more importantly, why did it scare people so much? The producer defending her, and now Gatwa, revealed that the move wasn't about politics at all. It was, in his words, simply as it should be. A natural continuation of a legacy that was always meant to evolve. But let's pause here. Doesn't that phrase sound almost too clean? Too simple, almost like it's hiding something, because behind the defense lies a truth the BBC doesn't always admit out loud. Doctor Who is a battleground. Every casting, every showrunner, every season is a test of loyalty, not just for the fans, but for the franchise itself. When Jodie stepped into the role, ratings initially spiked. Curiosity was through the roof. But slowly, the numbers dipped and critics sharpened their knives. Some blamed the writing, some blamed the cultural gender. And suddenly, Jodie became a lightning rod for debates far bigger than Doctor Who. And now we're watching the cycle repeat with Ncuti Gatwa. His charisma, his talent, his ability to take the Doctor in new directions is undeniable. Yet the same backlash rises from the same corners of fandom. And the producer's defense isn't just about Ncuti or Jodie. It's about putting the entire weight of Doctor Who's future on one very dangerous question. Can the show survive when parts of its audience refuse to accept what the Doctor was always meant to be? And here's where I need you to think carefully, because this is the forbidden truth the producers don't say out loud. Every single regeneration is a gamble with survival. Not just creatively, but financially. If the backlash grows too loud, if the ratings dip too low, if the audience fractures too deeply, the BBC pulls back, budgets shrink, deals collapse. And what we know as Doctor Who starts to wither. That's why this producer's defense matters so much. It isn't just about protecting Jodie Whittaker or Ncuti Gatwa from online hate. It's about fighting for the soul of the show. It's about drawing a line in the sand and saying, Doctor Who is change. Always has been, always will be. But now comes the chilling part, because history shows us that whenever a franchise pushes against this kind of backlash, the backlash itself only grows louder. And if you've been paying attention, you know the storm is far from over. So let me ask you this. Is Doctor Who on the verge of becoming more powerful than ever, or are we watching the seeds of its downfall being planted in real time? The problem is much bigger than online trolls leaving comments. Because let's be honest, backlash doesn't just live on social media anymore. It bleeds into headlines, it spreads across YouTube, it influences public perception, and sooner or later, it reaches the one place that matters most, the offices of the BBC. And this is where Doctor Who's future gets fragile. You see, the BBC doesn't look at fandom through the lens of passion. They look at it through the lens of numbers. Ratings, audience demographics, merchandise sales, international streaming deals. And what happens when those numbers start to slip? Executives panic, budgets shrink. Deals with companies like Disney or Netflix suddenly look less secure, and the cycle of fear begins. Think about what happened during Jodie Whittaker's era. Her debut brought in massive audiences, one of the biggest openings the modern show had ever seen. But as the seasons wore on, the numbers fell. Was it because of her? Was it because of the writing? Was it because the show leaned too heavily into spectacle over substance? The truth is murkier, but here's the dangerous part: people wanted to blame her. They wanted a scapegoat. And that scapegoat became the idea of a female Doctor itself. Now, with Ncuti Gatwa, history is echoing again. His first full season brought fresh energy, bold storytelling, and a vibrant, modern Doctor that appealed to younger audiences. But alongside the praise came the backlash. The same headlines, the same online campaigns, the same insistence that this wasn't real Doctor Who, and that's where the producer's defense becomes more than just a statement. It's a counterattack. By declaring Gatwa's casting simply as it should be, he's refusing to even entertain the idea that this could be a mistake. But let's not kid ourselves. Behind closed doors, the BBC is asking questions. They're studying charts, spreadsheets, focus groups. They're trying to calculate whether this gamble is paying off, and this is where the cost of backlash becomes so deadly. Because whether or not you believe the hate, the noise is loud enough to shape reality. Perception becomes truth. If the internet screams that a female doctor or a black doctor killed the show, even if the real reason is poor scheduling, weak marketing, or inconsistent writing, that narrative seeps into the culture. It becomes the myth people tell about why Doctor Who stumbled, and myths are hard to kill. Let's not forget, Doctor Who isn't just fighting angry fans, it's fighting an entire media landscape where streaming giants are circling like vultures, ready to swoop in or walk away, depending on the numbers. Disney already tested the waters, funding Ncuti's run with blockbuster budgets and international hype. But if the backlash feeds into declining viewership, do you really think Disney will stick around? Or will they pull out, leaving the BBC scrambling with a half-broken show? And here's the terrifying part, this isn't theoretical. We've seen this cycle before. Look at Star Wars, look at Marvel, look at nearly every major franchise that pushed boundaries. The backlash doesn't just stay online, it translates into boardroom conversations, and once executives start doubting, the future of the entire series is at stake. So when a producer steps forward to defend Jodie and Ncuti, it's not just about defending actors. It's about trying to save Doctor Who from being swallowed whole by its own fractured fandom. But the question we have to ask is chilling, is it already too late? Because what if this isn't just backlash? What if this is the start of something the BBC can't contain? What if the real enemy of Doctor Who isn't cancellation but erosion? A slow, painful decline where budgets dry up, spin-offs are shelved, and the Doctor becomes a shadow of what they once were. The truth is, the backlash reveals a deeper sickness in fandom itself, a resistance to the very core of the show change. And if that sickness continues to grow, then no amount of producer defenses, no amount of bold casting, no amount of Disney money will save it. But there's another layer here, one the BBC never says out loud. Because what happens when backlash doesn't just target casting, but starts bleeding into the stories themselves? And that is where the secrets get darker. Here's the part the BBC will never admit publicly: backlash isn't just noise anymore. It's data. Every trending hashtag, every negative comment, every YouTube rant, it all feeds into algorithms, and those algorithms shape what people see. If enough people insist the show is broken, suddenly the algorithm amplifies that voice. Suddenly casual viewers scrolling past headlines don't see excitement, they see controversy. And controversy sticks. And the irony, that's how backlash becomes self-fulfilling. A fanbase convinced that change ruined. The series convinces outsiders not to even give it a chance. Ratings fall, budgets shrink, and then the critics claim victory. See, we were right all along, when in truth, the fall wasn't caused by casting at all, but by the echo chamber that backlash created. This is why the producer's defense of Gatwa and Whittaker matters so much. It's not just about celebrating diversity. It's about fighting an information war. A war where perception is reality and the enemy isn't just trolls, it's the algorithms that feed them power. But here's the secret the BBC doesn't want you to know: they're scared. Not just of ratings, not just of bad press, but of what happens if Doctor Who becomes unprofitable again. Remember, this show was cancelled once before. The so-called classic era ended in the late 80s, not because fans stopped caring, but because executives lost faith. They decided the show wasn't worth the risk anymore. And if you think history can't repeat itself, think again. The silence around spin-offs is already proof. Unit, the new era was announced with fanfare, yet where is it? No trailer, no release date, no marketing push. Whispers suggest it's delayed indefinitely, waiting to see how Ncuti's numbers hold. And what about the war between the land and the sea? Another ghost project, swallowed by the uncertainty of Doctor Who's future. This is the real cost of backlash, not cancellation in one dramatic moment, but erosion. A future where promises fade, projects stall, and the Doctor is forced into a quiet retreat. And all the while, the people shouting, "This isn't real Doctor Who!" congratulate themselves, blind to the fact that they're helping destroy the very thing they claim to love. But here's where it gets even darker. Because if the BBC decides the gamble isn't worth it, they have options. And those options could reshape Doctor Who forever. One option, a long hiatus, a cooling off period where the show disappears for years, just as it did after 1989. The BBC could quietly mothball the TARDIS, keeping it alive only in merchandise and novels until the backlash dies down. By then, the damage to fandom might be irreversible. Another option, a full reboot. Not another regeneration, but a complete rewrite of the Doctor's story. A new canon, a new starting point. Safe, relaunch designed to win back skeptical audiences by erasing everything controversial. Imagine a sanitized Disney-approved Doctor Who stripped of its edge, its risks, its daring changes. Will that even be Doctor Who anymore? And then there's the nuclear option selling the rights. If the BBC truly decides they can't handle the toxicity surrounding the show, they could let it go. To Netflix, to Amazon, to some global giant with deeper pockets and less patience for controversy, Doctor Who would survive, yes. But it would no longer belong to the BBC, or maybe even to us. So when a producer says Ncuti and Jodie's casting is simply as it should be, understand what that really means. It's not just a defense, it's a warning. A reminder that Doctor Who was always meant to change, that the Doctor was always meant to reflect the times. That resisting that change is like resisting regeneration itself. But here's the question that lingers like a shadow over everything. What happens if Backlash finally breaks the cycle of regeneration? What if one day the Doctor doesn't come back? Because that's the unspoken fear no one wants to say out loud. The Doctor's story only survives if we let it. And if fandom keeps tearing itself apart, the end of Doctor Who won't come from one bad season or one controversial casting. It will come from within, and that is the true cost of Backlash.